Hey, hello, it's been quite a while since I've last done any videos. I think almost a few months now at the time of this. I basically had too much going on, plus hospital and everything on top of that, but some of it was also just other distractions going on as well. So I'm kind of just back here with the video where I'll go through the various Keter cards, basically every Keter card that comes out in set 12. So in Japan they've already got it, they've got the entire list now. Of the cards, and they've got the cards themselves in stores. So I'm just going to start with the triple rares, and then I'm going to work my way down to the commons and just kind of go through some thoughts on those cards as well. So we've got the new Bastion finally. Well, I say finally because I think there's probably been like this anticipation ever since we had Nirvana and also Bruce later down the line that maybe some of these cards will get like new forms as well. We've already seen like Youthbuck and Leonorn and I don't know if Jord had it as well. I can't remember because he's the other trial deck. But basically, those bosses, they had trial decks, and it didn't really take long for them to get replacement grade 3s. Whereas the first trial decks, which were basically very cheap, they've already got the replacement ones, well, way later. But Magnolia, nothing there yet. Nothing with Seraph Snow either. Although I think those characters have been a bit more sidelined so far. So Bastion is treated with the same name as the original Bastion, the same grade 3 one. They're doing this thing, I suppose they're just helping with Persona Ride, they're helping with the ride line, so the ride line still works with the new grade 3s as well. We've seen the same thing recently with Hexorb Aquamarine as well. So the skill, all your grade 3 or grade 2 front row cards can't be chosen by card effects, which is quite important because in this format, basically D-Series, there's so much field control and it kind of just comes up randomly as well, so this card is very helpful. It's a bit similar to what Regalia has in V-Series as well, but I would say we didn't really need it as much playing V compared to this, but unless you're against certain matchups. But I think in D it's kind of like really random, like you can't really plan that well sometimes, unless you've got like the most up-to-date knowledge of every single matchup, then you're going to get easily blindsided, whereas back in the day with clan format, normally you kind of just see, okay, it's Kagero, they're probably going to have field control, Narukami, they have field control. So you kind of get a bit of an idea on what the decks do really. It's a bit more random because we don't really have clans, so like almost all the nations have field control access as well, and there's various ride lines that will get more and more over time as well. So that's something to bear in mind. I don't think Lyrical has any field control though. Also, the grade 3s in your front row in addition get 5k power too. This works on the opponent's turn as well, so you always have protection no matter whose turn. Forgot to mention it's not just hand traps as well, which I don't think there's any hand traps yet in D-Series, I'm not entirely sure. But also the 5k means that your units are going to be harder to attack into because they'll be like at least 18k normally as well, and it gets bigger because there's another card that comes in a set that actually gains 10k including during your opponent's turn as well. Then the Restless ability, so at the end of the battle that this unit attacked, choose one of your grade 3 or less rear guards and standards, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, it gains the auto ability once per turn basically. When it attacks, costs Cam +1, discard a Bastion, and it gets drive checks until in turn. So you basically have the 4 attacks just like usual. You don't get the 10k buff though, but you don't have to actually drive check into any specific card either now, as well as having to discard. So no discard. No need to drive check specific cards, you just have to end your battle with your Vanguard and you get the ability to stand a unit just like that. Then you get the drive checks as a bonus as well, just because your opponent's on grade 3, so if your opponent high rolls you, you got a bit more advantage. It's a bit like Minerva in a way as well on top of that. So the other ability, Cam +1 discard a Bastion, it's sort of like a 2 for 2 because you're basically CB1, which if you want to treat that as a 1 card advantage and the discard cost, and then you're basically filtering through 2 more cards, which can matter because in Bastion you have a lot of grade 3 units as well, so you don't have as much shield, and trying to get some heals is always nice as well along the way, just to give you a bit more defensive advantage as well. So quite good actually. I actually think this deck is going to be very interesting, and the fact that you're not as tied by grade 3s either, especially with some of the support cards we'll go to later on, means there's potential for people to actually kind of try different variations. But you can also play the grade 4 Bastion with this if you wanted to as well, but if you go for that, you probably do want to play a bit more grade 3s for the restand as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of lists are going to come out of this as well, the different variations maybe, if there are, because normally what happens is you get a bunch of tops and then everyone just kind of goes around the same list, which we kept seeing time and time again earlier in Overdress as well, while people kept ignoring the latest support. Next we have Seiji Dragon, Wisdom Claw Dragon. So this is Solarian support. When placed on rear from deck, gains 5k power. So a little bit of nice bonus power, a bit of small text extra on top of whatever the next skill is. So it's on place on rear guard. So it doesn't matter if it's called from deck or if it's just called from hand, either during main phase. And what you do is you basically look at top card of your deck. This is as long as you've got Solarian as your Vanguard, of course. And what you do then is you can put it on the top or bottom of the deck, and then you can blast one and reveal the top card of your deck, and you may call it to the open rear if it is a unit card, obviously, because you can't do it if it's an order. And if you do not call a card, you put it into soul. So if it's an order, you just put it in soul. You don't even have to call it, so you can put a specific card as well. So you've got an opportunity to soul charge as well, which can also help fuel the cost of Solarian as well, if you don't want to go for the extra call. But it's a bit like a semi-Kyber stacker at the same time. So this is a very neat card, as well as having the bonus power. So I see this as being pretty handy, and the fact that it's also good even in your hand as well helps with that. And those counterblast costs aren't too bad, I guess, because you do have a bit of a countercharge engine in the deck as well to help with that. Next we have Yellow Jeweled Beast Topaz. So it's a bit like the Crystal Beasts from Yu-Gi-Oh! It kind of reminds me a little bit of, but it's sort of like a 2 to 3 off, I think. What it does is when placed on rear or guardian circle, I say 2 to 3 off. I mean 1 is fine. If you want, you can basically do 1. I think 3 would just be too many. Well, it's more like you don't want to play 4 copies. But I'll explain that as I get through the effect. So when it's placed on rear, put on guardian, you basically put a total of 2 cards from soul or drop that were in the ride deck into deck face up. So if you think about it, the cost, it's based on the ride deck, which that means by turn 4, you then might have the opportunity to basically soul blast all your ride line pieces. And I say that with might because obviously you need to persona ride as well to make sure that your original grade 3 ride goes into soul as well. So obviously if you have to take away 2 every time, the third copy is impossible to use, but you could always play 3 if you want to see it more often for whatever reason. Otherwise, 2 copies is safe, I guess, because you know that if you get 1, it's always going to work. If you get 2, it might work, but then at least you don't feel like you're wasting a single card in the deck. But the effects are quite strong, and they're free as well, so what it does is you basically either, depending on what circle it's on, rearguard circle, if it's placed there, then you get to go top 5, you choose 1 unit from among them with a grade less than or equal to your Vanguard, and then you call it, and then you shuffle your deck. But if it's a phase other than Jujumei phase, then you have to call it in rest, so they're trying to stop you from multi-attacking, of course, as well, with that ability. There's quite a few cards like that, actually, that seem to be specifying phases, like the Genesis card as well, that came in the previous set, which we don't have in English yet, but it kind of mentions a funny thing about unless there's a battle phase or something like that to kind of stop you from doing certain things, which is a bit more like future proofing in D format, I think. But yeah, it's a very strong caller. Obviously with Solarian you can't really use this to chain attacks, but what you can do is set up a free field with it, which is quite nice. And these decks, a lot of these Sanctuary decks do Soul Blast quite a lot, especially now that you've got the grade 2s that basically Soul Blast when you discard them. There's that as well, as long as you open them early game, of course, because you can go through a lot of games where you never have them in your hand anyway. And then the other skill, if it's placed on Guardian Circle, gains 15k shield, so you basically got yourself a 20k shield, which is one of those things people do ask about. They want more shields, but what's the point in shields if there's over triggers that have 100 million power, right? So there is that problem as well, which I think is why there's a bit of a debate over whether or not people want to play the Blitz order, the Regardless Piece one, that sort of counts over triggers. Next we have Grandeur Edge Dragon, which is Bastion support. So in the hand, when it's revealed, you can basically treat it as 2 cards. So those ride line cards that we've been using before, usually you've had to always like reveal a lot of cards. So when you mulligan, you're generally like trying to have as many grade 3s in hand as possible, even if they're like not the greatest, because, or at least the greatest for the early game. So you might decide, okay, well I'm not going to try and get Alden or whatever back in the day. But now there's a bit more safety net with basically the idea that you might not redraw into enough grade 3s, so you could even go as far as like playing more non-grade 3s because of this card now, helping out, just like with the new Bastion, where it doesn't force you to actually have to basically drive check a grade 3 or greater, like with Prime in this case. So you've got those options now, and he's got the other ability, Rearguard Guardian Circle. If you have Bastion Vanguard, it gains 10k power and 10k shield as well, and it's active during the post turn. So this is the effect I was mentioning earlier. So with Bastion, the new one, it's basically a 28k both players' turns. So it's hard for them to just kill by battle, and it's hard for them to kill with card effects as well. So you've got quite a few, you've got quite a lot of defensive measures in place against a lot of decks in the game as well. Obviously, if you call it, you can't actually guard with it unless you use some sort of special skill that puts it into the guarding circle. Next we have Knight's Decapitation, Nehalemia. So Nehalemia is on place on rearguard circle, costs Soul Blast 1, choose one opponent's rearguards, and then put it on the bottom of the deck, and your opponent draws a card. So it's a very somewhat free field control card, but obviously it doesn't mess up the opponent too much in the process because they do get a card back in the process, but can be pretty handy. That's why it's double red, because even for you as a player, if you see some really problematic cards on the field, this is always something you can play, and this can be played in any Sanctuary deck. So if you're playing this in, you can play this in like Premium, and just go for this Soul Blast free field control card, which could help in some decks as well, in a way that you couldn't really use it in this sort of thing before. So that's going to be interesting as well. It's also going to be quite good in maybe Shadow Paladins possibly, but I don't really know the decks too well. But they do like a bit of field control. But then again, I think they're more about retire. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure on this one. I just know they kind of like to remove cards in the field because it powers up their units and things as well when there's nothing in the same column, depending what cards they play. Delta Pen Sorceress. So this card is actually the main point of the video, this one, because I was originally going to just talk about this, but then I decided just to cover the whole set because by the time I got round to the whole set was already out. So when it's placed on rearguard from hand, so it has to be from hand. If you have a Grade 3 Greater Sorcerer, so it's a bit more like a turn 3 onwards card, which we've already got quite a handful of cards like that, where you have to kind of wait a bit. Austerity Sorceress is another big one as well. What's the other one? For Glowside for Sorcerer, so it's called. The promo does the same thing as well. You have to be on at least Grade 3 to use that. So there is a bit of a weird balancing act with Grade 2s. You've got some early game rush Grade 2s, you've got some later game Grade 2s. But then obviously you might also have to balance out boosting as well, so it's quite interesting building this. When placed on rear, you basically can blast 1, look at top 2, you choose a card from among them, put it into your hand, and you put the rest on top of your bottom deck. So you can't do draw 2 like with Austerity Sorcerers. You have to actually take only one, but you can put the other one wherever you want. So if you don't like both cards, you can still put them on bottom deck, which you couldn't do with Austerity actually. You had to just draw it and then draw them and then put them on bottom, which is kind of the same thing, I guess. You just draw both and then put one of the two, I guess, back to the bottom, but you have now an option for your entire hand on top of that. Which, funny enough, actually, with the new builds, because of a lot of lists, they're not actually doing any shuffling effects right now, because the main shuffler, the Grade 1, Totris, basically that card doesn't really let you search for Aquamarine. So because of that, since Aquamarine isn't treated as Hex Orb in the deck, the problem is that there's less reason to play cards at shuffle, and due to that Austerity, when you stack a trigger to bottom of your deck from your hand, like any trigger, even the OT, you basically just lose access to it for almost the entire game, unless you manage to get yourself, to deck out through reverse stacking. So this is kind of maybe more ideal, because with this you've now got some control over what goes back on top, so you can return stuff that you've already drawn into, which is really good. And honestly, I think I remember playing the odd game like last week where I would have loved to have had this in hand, although to be fair, it depends what I would have run as well, because I didn't draw any of my draw ability cards either in that game that I played. But this is very good in those games where you draw too many triggers, and if you could just find this card at some point, then you can finally do something. Because one of the big problems with Hex Orb is actually needing to drive triggers. So a lot of decks, they can just go like multi-attack no matter what, but Hex Orb, even though you get triggers often enough to trigger the reset abilities, what happens if you don't get trigger? Then the deck just folds, basically. So it's very useful for that as well. And there's also a Grade 1 that can return crits and fronts to hand, so you can possibly use it with this as well if you want to maybe go for a good front trigger, because front triggers are very powerful with Aquamarine as well. So that as well, but you have to do this on the Persona Ride turn. You can't stack unless you Persona Ridden, so that part of the ability is a bit different. Is a bit of continuation that requires that. Next we will go on to Divine Sister Decoys. So Decoys is when your other unit is placed by your card ability, canvas 1 and draw. So it's a bit similar to the Dragon Tree Grade 1 for Keter Sanctuary. I think it was like something Soldar, I can't remember, but that card, its ability was like canvas 1. When placing a card in the same column, you draw a card. The thing is, this card only lets you do it by ability, but it doesn't matter where you call it. So if you're playing any cards that call by ability, this can probably be a better version of it actually, as long as you're not playing Dragon Tree. But as a bonus to it, if you have a Sauraran Vanguard, then the place unit also gains 5k as well. So this is a very nice card to have as a draw engine. And counterblasting isn't, well, I don't think it's a great issue with Sauraran, but then again, I've not tried a deck, I've not played against it, I've just read cards for the deck. I've got the cards now, so I need to kind of get around to doing it, to building the deck as well. But obviously I won't be playing this card because it's not out yet. Next we have Unfane Sky Dragon. So when this unit is placed on rearguard, so +1, look at top 7, choose one grade 3 Bastion, and then you put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And if you're revealed, you then have to choose a card from hand and discard it. So they're actually making you do this card after you've confirmed adding it to hand, which is feels a bit more like modern, I guess, the effect, because I am pretty sure we've seen cards maybe that have paid costs before you actually do the adding, but now we're paying the cost after. Although there is the Soul Blast 1 that you have to do beforehand, but depends how much you perceive as a cost, to be fair, as well. I don't know what the lists are going to be like and how Soul's going to feel like in this deck, but obviously if you want to play Dark Strain Dragon, that is something that does make you feel like you're losing Soul as well. So it's a very interesting card. You can feel your Bastion discard abilities as well, or even set up your Persona Ride. So I think a lot of people are probably going to want something like this in their decks as well, because one of the difficulties in Overdress is actually that Persona Riding is very awkward, because you have to kind of draw into the one of the 3 offs, or the regardless piece, or which I had to make probably because of how Angus' Persona Rider was. It's a very weird mechanic, because in past Vanguard, like Striding for example, you may just discard some of grade 3. So as long as you've got that one-off card, the grade 3 to ride, then you're set. And then in V series, some decks, not all of them. I mean, if you relied on one boss card, it generally kind of sucked, unless you had like a lot of searches for the card, of course. Like a lot of the more popular V decks at the end of the era had searches like Rosa, so top 7 search, look for the card with a certain name. You had like Jeffrey in Gurgoyle, you had like something in the wild, I can't remember the name. Even Thavas had one of those cards as well. Like some of the more popular decks did have searches, Decay in Astral Poets. So that's kind of an advantage to have as well, that you can do that in addition, because in Overdress, you've got one of your rides guaranteed, sure, because you're not having to draw into the cards, but then to actually feel the Persona Ride mechanic, you've basically got 3 physical copies of the other card in your deck. One of the other things that they've done as well is that they've made cards share names, so we've now got multiple Bastions with the same name. We've even got grade 4 Bastions, so technically this deck can actually get by without playing this card. It was kind of fine technically in a sense, but then again, maybe you don't want to play the old one for whatever reason. Depends what the list ends up being. I mean, I don't think people particularly like playing Hex Orb, the old Hex Orb in Hex Orb, because it feels a bit it kind of feels a bit old now. It doesn't really pull its weight. It kind of needs some really strong support if it wants to kind of keep its weight up a bit. So yeah, this is interesting. Next we have Knight of Desire Nodons. So Nodons is a Dragon Tree support card. When placed on Wraith, you have 3 or more markers. You see one and draw. Not much to talk about. It's just Dragon Tree support. There's no Mosk text anyway. This one's interesting. Magical Spinning Wind Perilous. So when your Vanguard's attacked, if it's the 5th battle of this turn or more, you basically get to bind it, and then you're basically perfect guarding. So it's a perfect guard that isn't a Sentinel, so it's quite good against Ultima, if you're against like any upcoming Gold Pan decks, because Go-Go can be used with Ultima as well. There's also Holy Shine as well, so that could come up as well. Ezel technically, but no one's really playing that anymore. I don't think I've seen anyone play in ages, but if it comes up in that, then you've got that too. So the reason why I specified this particularly is because Gold Paladins can actually play a card which what it does is, it's called Providence Angel. So Providence Angel, what it does is CB1 when placed, I think, or is it Axe skill? I think it's an Axe skill. But what it can do is you basically, if you have 1 or less in hand, you basically make it so your opponent can only use 1 Sentinel to guard. You have Elementary Sanctus, you can get around it, which is fine. But if you're playing like a Protect deck in Premium, for example, which I tested at locals actually just the other day, then it kind of hurts because then you're suddenly struggling to guard all of a sudden. So it's good against stuff like that, but the thing as well is that you may notice this 5th battle or more, so if you're worried that someone's playing around Hollow and you happen to be playing this as well for whatever reason, then you can always use this to PG against 5th battle at least, because what happens is sometimes people try to play around Hollow depending on what kind of deck they have, what kind of plays they have access to, and they might try and make that 5th attack count more. So it could be good for that kind of a bit more pinning down, let's just say, as well. So it's a very interesting card. Obviously it's susceptible to field control, so unless you're playing a deck like Regalia, which can give protection, or, well, you can play Dismal as well if it's anything in the battle phase that can retire it. There's that too, but there are some decks that can retire the main phase. Depends on the matchup, but it can be good as well. Or you can just Superior Call it mid-battle as well, in some decks too, so that's an option, such as V Fenrir, which I don't think anyone will be playing. Then we've got Sanctus. So this card, it's very interesting. It's a card that gives boost. I've kept an eye out for all the, well, trying to see if there's any boost cards that come out that boost something besides grade 3s, and the reason why I say that is because I play Regalia, and I've been kind of just trying to keep an eye out to see if there's anything besides Sea of Yggdrasil that can give boost, and now we finally got it. So, actually, I say that, sorry, give boost as in generically, so not specifying grade 3s, and because of that I'm kind of thinking about Norn. So Regalia Fate Norn's a grade 2, so nothing could actually give boost to it besides Sea of Yggdrasil, but now you can give boost to Sea of Yggdrasil without actually having this Sea of Yggdrasil thing on the field. So you can just use this order as an extra backup as well if you want to give boost. So all those times where you're just struggling to draw into Sea of Yggdrasils, you can now use this to buy some time and just go straight in with Norn as well. No time wasting there. Actually, as a matter of fact, you could also just use this in the early game as well. So you can just call Norn on turn 2 and just go swing, boost, restand. Just bear in mind you lose the drive. So this is actually going to be a neg 2 play, because you discard to restand with Norn, which is already a neg because you're losing your drives completely. But then you're also playing this order as well, so you got to be a bit smart if you decide to use it that way. But yeah, that's a thing you can do, and it's kind of funny that as well. So, but it's not just limited to Genesis. Maybe there's uses in other decks. So probably worth exploring and seeing what happens. If there's any odd cards. It's very unlikely they've made grade 2s and 3s that say when this card boosts, or I didn't about this card boosts or something, but I can think of, like, I mean, Genesis I can think of boosting with E1 like a Hime, if you want to like make use of a massive booster for whatever reason. But maybe there's like some beat stick, like some really strong beat stick cards in some of the United Sanctuary decks that you can just suddenly turn into boosters for whatever benefit, and then you maybe boost something that's actually normally, let's just say the clan design happens to be something that's relies on having less power. That's all about having less power, right? So maybe they justify making certain effects, right? Maybe there's something like that. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, but that's always something to look out for as well. See, like, if it's warped and broken any sort of like silent design rules out there that suddenly make things that were never remotely possible. Next we have Knights of Refinement Melvin. So this is well, it doesn't look very interesting actually. It's just when it attacks a Vanguard, if the sum of the grades of your unit is 12 or greater, it gains 5k power. That's it. So it's just a generic common 18k beta. Oh, it lasts it on the turn, so you can stack it. It's literally like Alden, but you're gonna play Alden instead of this, surely, right? So yeah, it's a budget Alden, I guess, in a sense. I think I've just lost one of my windows because I accidentally dragged the tab, so let me just get this back. Oh, there we go. So Dimis, Emitter Dragon. So this card, when your other units placed on rear from deck, so it has to be from deck, you can't call from hand. You can cast one, choose one of your rear guards and return to your hand. So you can return anything, just provided you call from deck. So it's good in Paladin decks, of course, but not quite as much in, say, Genesis or Oracle Think Tank. There's less ways of doing that kind of play. But then again, you can combine Keter Sanctuary cards if you wanted to for access to wider card pool, like Kybre, for example. So I mean, every Night Sanctuary deck can now technically Superior Call if they wanted to trigger the effect. But this is interesting because the decks, like a lot of those decks, do not have any sort of bouncing ability. So this is the first time they've been able to do it. I mean, Oracle Think Tank, I say first time loosely, by the way. For a lot of decks, it's the first time. Oracle Think Tank has a card which can bounce other cards. I'm saying other specifically because technically there's Able Nil, but Able Nil only returns himself. But Oracle Think Tank has Goddess of Flower Divination Sakuya. Sakuya is basically on ride. You bounce everything back to hand, but no one plays it anymore because it has no gift marker. That's all. That's the reason why no one's going to play it. Because, you know, gift markers just power creep the entire game out. into oblivion. So cards like that aren't really appreciated anymore. So this is kind of a new alternative, and you're not having to ride either. It's a rearguard effect. It's got Counterblast 1, which could sting, so it may depend on composition, but the options exist. You can play a deck around this sort of thing if you wanted to. You can add stuff like Perfect Guards to your hand as well, something like this if you need to. It's interesting utility, but you can't do it until you ride grade 3, unless you Superior called it early, of course, then you could. So next, we have Indomitable Angel. So Indomitable Angel, its skill is when placed on Guardian, if your Vanguard's grade is greater than your Vanguard's, if your opponent's Vanguard's grade is greater than your Vanguard, it gains 10k shield. So it's basically 15k shield if you're basically being high rolled against. That's basically all it is. You can intercept with it as well, so because it says put on Guardian Circle. Then we've got Knight of Austerity Angus, so a very Brexit card here. Someone who clearly wants everyone to just starve to death. So when this unit attacks a Vanguard, if you have 2 or more rear guards than your opponent, it gains 10k power until the battle. So this is a very interesting card because you can actually rush people early game and probably get them high damage very fast off the bat, unless your opponent happens to be playing around it, whether on purpose or not, of course, because obviously it's a generic card. You can't really predict if someone's running this in the deck, right, unless you know the player and the deck too well. But this card's pretty good for rush. If you're playing certain decks that can also maintain that kind of condition, then more the power to it, because 20k beaters for free is, especially across any stage of the game, is pretty nice. I mean, remember, 12k beaters back in the day used to be a big deal. So, but this is a 20k beater. Knight of Nobility Azuleus. So this is a skill similar to the dragon that we saw earlier for Bastion, where when it's revealed. This one's actually a bit different in terms of like when it's revealed, it's treated as a grade 3 because it's grade 2. So you're not actually treated as multiple, it's just one grade 3 it's treated as. And then the other ability is when it's placed on rear guard. If you have a grade 3 Vanguard Bastion's name, Canvas 1, choose one opponent's rear guards in the same column and then put it on bomb deck. So it's got a bit of field control now as well. So you can get rid of any of those pesky units that might be causing you trouble if you want to play this, which people might actually. It can be treated as grade 3 when revealed, so it can't mess up your ride line. But the other thing that's interesting, this card and the dragon that we spoke about earlier, those 2 cards, they can also feel like in premium you could play them purely just so you can run something like Salary, for example, where maybe you don't want to play too many grade 3s, so you decide to play these kind of janky cards just to make the condition easier without making your deck like heavy on grade 3s. Which, by the way, these cards do have a bit more application premium, especially with grade 3 heals as well existing. So you can always build a deck towards that direction for whatever reason. If you want to. And then there's another card here, Coolheaded Knight Resin. So this is a field control card, a very interesting one though, because it's actually just goes after everyone with the same name. So when placed on rear, Counterblast 1 discard a card, so quite a bit of heavier cost. Choose one of your opponent's rear guard. Your opponent puts all cards with the same card name as a chosen unit from rear guard, but also on drop as well to the bottom deck in the order. So you go against a deck like Grand Blue, it's going to hurt quite a bit because they set up all those Skull Dragons. You call this, and then you just say GG to Grand Blue, and the deck kind of starts falling apart as well. But at least they're not decking out because it doesn't retire. Why does it matter if it retires? Sorry, doesn't remove from play, I guess, like in Yu-Gi-Oh or something. It goes back to deck, so they don't actually lose deck. They're gaining more deck size. So at the same time, it's a bit like it's not all too doom and gloom in a way, because they at least benefit from an increased deck size back. So it just kind of means the game is going to be grinded, which could also have disadvantages for them as well, if you're beating them down with something as well. Next we have Generous Flute Angel. So this is a sorceress card, no soul blast cost, no counterblast cost. It's a discard cost when placed on rare. So it's a grade 1. We've had quite a lack of grade 1s that specify sorceress but don't have like a cost attached to it. So there has been a bit of demand, I think, for more grade 1s to appear. So what you do is you discard a card, you look at top 2 of your deck, and you choose a card from among them, put it into your hand, and then put the rest on top of your deck. So it has to stay on the top, which means you're not able to kind of have as much control as some of the grade 2s we've seen before. But otherwise, it's kind of handy, and it's not grade restricted either. You can use the early game as well, so there's that option too. So yeah, Hex Orb, more options now than before, and a bit more modernized as well, which we've had a lot of sorcerer support, but they've always felt very outdated, like they never kept up with the times. Next we have Decorate Razor Angel, so it's another card that gives 5k. I know it's not the most popular effect among some people out there, but this one's actually quite an interesting one because it's actually a 5k base as well, but the upside is that it responds to the unit that attacks in the same column, so it stacks the power basically. So if you've got a restanding rearguard, actually no, it doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't stack. It's until end of battle, but you'll be able to use it twice for 2 individual battles, which means you're now giving 2 5ks out rather than doing it once, because you say you did boost and gain 5k, you can't. It's not really boost give 5k. It's just if the card in the same column attacks, it gains 5k. So you do Solar Iron, for example, or Hexorb to restand the unit that's in front of it, and then you're just getting the 5k again regardless of the position of this card, as long as it's in the same column. Doesn't matter if it's stand or rest. So it's an interesting little gimmick there, and yeah, that's I think more or less it. I've already gone through Sanctus, so yeah, I think I've opened the window twice. But that's pretty much it for my kind of discussion on the different cards in set 12 that are coming out for Keter Sanctuary, and some ideas on how you can use them as well sprinkled in with it. So yeah, do take care, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.